surged through me. I rushed to the rope, pulling it down so I could get a better angle. My fingers trembled as I clutched the scissors, trying to focus on the task at hand. But the blades felt dull, as if they had been deliberately designed to make this harder. I sawed at the rope furiously, but it barely gave. My hands were sweating, my breath coming in ragged gasps. The seconds ticked away and I could hear the faint hum of a clock in the background, each tick a reminder of how little time I had left. I had no idea what the unpleasant consequences would be if I failed, but I didn't want to find out. I cut harder, my muscles straining as I fought to keep calm. But the more I struggled, the more the rope seemed to resist. With only 2 minutes left, I felt my grip slipping. The scissors weren't sharp enough. I was going to fail. A soft hissing sound filled the room and I froze. I looked around, my heart racing. The walls seemed to be closing in on me, and then I saw it. A gas was seeping in from the vents above. My lungs constricted as the air grew thick and acrid. I coughed violently, the sharp smell burning my throat. No more time. I slashed at the rope with everything I had left. It frayed, the fibers splitting just enough. With one final desperate cut, the rope snapped.
Part 13. The Unseen Consequences. We stood in a line, all of us battered and shaken from our individual trials. There were fewer of us now. Several participants were missing, and I could only imagine what had happened to them.
Congratulations, you have survived the second round.
There was no relief in his voice, only cold satisfaction. He gestured toward the darkened hallway behind him.
The third round begins soon, be prepared.
Part 14, the third round. The third round was unlike anything I'd experienced before. The tension in the air was palpable as we were led down a long, narrow corridor, deeper into the abandoned building. The walls seemed to close in around us, the air growing colder with each step. At the end of the corridor was a large steel door. 2 masked figures stood on either side of it, motionless, their eyes hidden behind dark lenses. One of them stepped forward and opened the door, revealing a dark room beyond. This time the instructions were simple.
One person will not leave this room.
A wave of dread washed over me. My legs felt like they were made of lead as I walked into the room, along with the others who had survived the previous rounds. There were only 5 of us left now. We stood in a circle, each of us staring at the floor, too afraid to meet each other's eyes. In the center of the room was a large pit. The edges of it were lined with jagged metal spikes, and the bottom was shrouded in darkness. I had no idea how deep it went, but it was clear that falling in wasn't an option.
Welcome to the third round. The rules are simple. Only 4 of you will make it out of this room. The 5th person will not.
The room fell into a suffocating silence as we all processed what the voice had just said. I could feel the tension building, the air thick with fear. There was no escape, no way to avoid what was coming. Part 15, the decision. The air in the room became heavy with dread as we all glanced around at each other. No one wanted to be the first to speak, to break the uneasy silence that hung over us. My mind raced as I weighed my options. Who would be voted out? And would it really come down to a majority vote, or would someone take things into their own hands? The others seemed just as confused and terrified as I was. There was a young woman to my left, her face pale and drawn, and a middle-aged man to my right, his hands clenched into fists at his sides. None of us had any connection to each other, but now we were being forced to decide who among us wouldn't make it out.
Finally, the middle-aged man broke the silence. "We have to be rational about this," he said, his voice strained but calm. "We need to think this through."
His words seemed to snap everyone out of their daze. The young woman nodded, biting her lip nervously. The others shifted uneasily but said nothing. I remained silent, my heart pounding in my chest. There was no way to approach this rationally. How could we? We were being forced to choose between our own survival and someone else's death.
The man continued, his voice steady but desperate. "We all want to survive. We just need to figure out..."
He didn't get to finish his sentence. There was a sudden movement from behind him, and before anyone could react, one of the others, a man who had been standing quietly in the corner, lunged forward. In his hand was a small, sharp blade, and before I could even comprehend what was happening, he plunged it into the middle-aged man's side. The room erupted into chaos. The man staggered back, clutching his side as blood poured from the wound. The attacker backed away, his eyes wild and desperate.
"There's no time," the attacker shouted, his voice cracking with panic. "One of us has to die."
The rest of us froze, too shocked to move. The digital clock continued its merciless countdown. 5 minutes, 4 minutes and 59 seconds, 4 minutes and 58 seconds. The middle-aged man collapsed to the ground, gasping for breath as blood pooled around him. The attacker stood there, panting heavily, his eyes darting between the rest of us.
"I did what I had to do," he muttered, his voice shaking. "I did what we all wanted to do."
Part 16. The Consequences of Action. For a moment, I thought the game would end then and there, that the attacker's action would somehow satisfy the twisted rules we were bound by. But the voice on the speaker crackled to life again, cold and detached.
"You've made your choice, but the rules must be followed. The vote must take place."
The words hit me like a punch to the gut. The attacker had acted out of desperation, but it hadn't changed anything. The vote still had to happen. I glanced at the others. The young woman was shaking, tears streaming down her face. The others were frozen, unsure of what to do. And then the attacker, realizing what the voice had meant, turned his eyes toward us.
"You don't need to vote. I've already killed him," he said, his voice frantic, as if trying to reason with an unseen force. "You don't need to do this."
But the countdown continued. 2 minutes and 30 seconds. 2 minutes and 29 seconds. The fear in the room was suffocating. We knew what had to be done, but none of us could bring ourselves to do it. The attacker stood there, his knife still in hand, daring any of us to move against him. I don't know what came over me in that moment. Maybe it was fear, or maybe it was sheer survival instinct. But before I realized what I was doing, I stepped forward and grabbed the metal rod that had been placed near the pit as part of the game's setup. I didn't think, I didn't plan, I just acted. With a quick motion, I swung the rod and hit the attacker in the back of the head. He staggered forward, dropping the knife, his body teetering on the edge of the pit. I watched in horror as he lost his balance and fell, disappearing into the darkness below. The room went silent. Before we dive deeper into the madness of the recruiter's twisted game, I want to take a moment to remind you. If you're enjoying this thrilling ride, don't forget to hit that like button. Think of it as your life vest in the turbulent waters of this story. And hey, if you find yourself wanting more terrifying tales like this one, subscribe and join our growing community of horror enthusiasts. Click that bell icon so you're notified every time a new nightmare lands on your screen. Trust me, you won't want to miss what's lurking just around the corner. Part 17. The end of the third round. The clock on the wall stopped. 0 minutes and 0 seconds. The silence was deafening, punctuated only by the sound of my own labored breathing. I dropped the rod and stepped back, my heart pounding in my chest. The voice came over the speaker one last time.
"The round is complete. 4 remain."
The door opened and the masked figures returned. Without a word, they escorted the survivors, myself, the young woman, and 2 others, out of the room. I could barely process what had just happened. The middle-aged man's lifeless body lay on the floor, a pool of blood spreading beneath him. The pit was still there, a gaping maw of darkness that had swallowed the attacker whole. We were led into a different part of the building, our heads spinning with disbelief. The third round was over, but the horrors of what had happened lingered, etched into our minds. After what felt like hours of walking in silence, we were led into a brightly lit room, completely different from the rest of the building. It was sterile, clinical, like a hospital or a laboratory. At the center of the room stood a single chair, and in that chair sat a man. He wasn't wearing a mask. His face was calm, almost pleasant, but there was something chilling about the way he looked at us. I recognized him immediately, the recruiter, the man who had first approached me in the park. The man who had brought me into this nightmare. He smiled.
"Congratulations, you've made it to the final round."
None of us responded. We were too exhausted, too traumatized to say anything. The recruiter stood up and walked toward us, his hands clasped behind his back.
"You've been wondering why you were chosen, haven't you? Why you were selected for this game?"
I swallowed hard, my mind racing. I had been asking myself that question since the very beginning. Why me? Why had I been dragged into this twisted game?
"You wanted this?"
His voice cut through the silence like a knife. His smile twisted into something dark, almost sadistic, as he walked in slow, deliberate circles around us, his shoes clicking on the cold, sterile floor. The sound was rhythmic, hypnotic, each step tightening the knot of fear in my chest. I could feel the others beside me shifting uneasily, their breaths quick and shallow. But we were all paralyzed, trapped in the gaze of this man who had orchestrated everything, who had watched us suffer, knowing we were just pawns in his sick game.
I know what you're thinking. You didn't want this, right? You didn't ask for it. You were just in the wrong place at the wrong time.
He paused, his eyes boring into mine.
But is that really true?
My throat tightened. His words felt like a vice, pressing on some buried part of my mind I had tried to forget. He was wrong. He had to be wrong. I never wanted this. I never asked for any of this. The recruiter's eyes flickered with something close to amusement. He stopped in front of me, his face inches from mine. I could feel the heat of his breath, smell the faint scent of expensive cologne, but his presence felt suffocating.
Didn't you?
He said softly, almost coaxing, as if he were luring me into some dark confession. Think back. The moment you first saw the flyer, the ad for Squid Game 2, what did you feel? I could see it now. The ad, simple and cryptic, plastered on a random street corner. I had passed it a dozen times on my way to work. The bold red letters had caught my eye. Want to play a game? A game. That's all I thought it was. Some online contest, a chance for a quick thrill. But there had been something else. A flicker of excitement, buried beneath the boredom of my daily life. I'd been stuck in a rut. My job, my routine, everything about my life had felt hollow. That ad had been a spark, a small but undeniable temptation. What if? What if it was real? What if I could break free from the monotony? What if I could be part of something bigger?
You wanted to escape. You wanted something more. And now you've gotten exactly what you wished for.
I shook my head violently, trying to push the thoughts away, but they were already there, rooted in my mind. His words, the certainty in his voice, were too close to the truth. The others stood frozen, their faces drained of color, but I could see it in their eyes, too. They were fighting the same internal battle.
And the best part?
The recruiter stepped back, his grin widening.
You're not alone. Millions of people just like you watched that first season, imagining themselves in the game. They wanted to feel the fear, the thrill of life or death stakes. And they watched, knowing they would never have to pay the price. They cheered as players fell, as bodies hit the ground, because it was all entertainment to them.
He spread his arms wide, as if presenting us with the ultimate truth.
But you? You're not watching anymore. You're in it.
The lights overhead flickered, casting long shadows across the room. The tension in the air was unbearable, thick with the weight of his words.
You think you're the victims here, but the truth is, you were always part of this game. The moment you let yourself imagine what it would be like, the moment you let that excitement in, you became one of us.
I felt my knees go weak. My pulse was pounding in my ears, my vision swimming as the room seemed to tilt. It couldn't be true. I wasn't one of them. I didn't choose this. But his words echoed in my mind like a curse. I had wanted something more, something beyond the mundane, and now, in the most twisted way, I had gotten it. The recruiter stepped closer again, his voice dropping low, almost soothing.
It's liberating, isn't it? To realize that deep down, you're not so different from the ones who designed this game. You wanted a taste of it, the danger, the thrill. You wanted to know how far you could go.
His hand came to rest on my shoulder, cold and firm.
And now, we're going to find out.
Suddenly, the sterile white lights flickered off, plunging the room into total darkness. I felt the recruiter's hand slip away as everything went still. A long, tense moment passed, my breath catching in my throat.
Then, in the silence, a low mechanical hum started up, a sound that filled the room, vibrating through the floor.
I heard a faint click, and one by one, small red lights appeared all around us. Dozens of them, each one blinking ominously in the dark. I realized with a jolt what they were cameras. We were being watched, every move, every breath recorded. But by who?
The stakes, your life. The recruiter's voice cut through the blackness, calm and chilling. This is the final round.
A sudden beam of light illuminated the far end of the room, revealing a door I hadn't noticed before.
Or you can stay and become part of something greater than yourself. But know this, you will carry the weight of every life you took, every choice you made for the rest of your days. The recruiter's voice echoed from somewhere unseen now, disembodied. You can choose to walk out that door and leave this place.
The lights flickered back on, revealing the recruiter standing at the opposite end of the room, near a console that seemed to control the cameras and whatever horrors awaited us. His finger hovered over a switch, his eyes fixed on us with an expectant look.
What will it be? He asked, his voice full of dark anticipation. Freedom or immortality?
My mind raced.
The door was right there within reach,
But something held me back, a gnawing feeling that if I left, I'd never truly escape.
I had already crossed the line, and deep down, I knew it.
I wasn't the only one hesitating.
The others glanced nervously at each other, weighing the impossible choice.
Some of them were ready to bolt, but others, just like me, were frozen, caught between fear and a sick curiosity.
The recruiter's voice dropped lower, almost a whisper now. Recruiter, there's no going back. One final decision. Will you leave, or will you play?
I took a step toward the door, my heart thudding in my chest. But just as I reached for the handle, the recruiter flipped the switch. The floor beneath us gave way, a trapdoor opening into a bottomless abyss. I heard the others scream as they plummeted into the darkness below, their voices fading into nothing. I felt myself falling, my stomach lurching, the ground disappearing beneath me. For a brief moment I was weightless, suspended between life and death, between reality and the nightmare I had chosen. And then, just as suddenly as it had started, the fall stopped. I landed on something soft, the impact knocking the wind out of me. I lay there, gasping for air, trying to make sense of what had just happened. Around me, the others were groaning, struggling to their feet. We had landed on some kind of cushion, but the relief was short-lived. The walls around us began to shift, panels sliding away to reveal a new, even darker chamber. In the distance, I could hear the recruiter's voice, faint and distorted, echoing through hidden speakers.
Welcome to the final game. Let's see who has the will to survive.
The walls started to close in and I realized with a sickening jolt that the game was far from over. And I wasn't sure if I'd ever wake up from this nightmare.
Now that we've peeled back the layers of this chilling experience, it's time to ask, did you think you could handle the truth? If you found yourself on the edge of your seat, make sure to share this video with your friends. After all, misery loves company. And if you haven't already, subscribe for more harrowing tales that will make your heart race and keep you up at night. Click on the playlist in the top left corner to explore more spine-chilling stories. And let's see if you're brave enough to confront what lies in the darkness.